Brooklyn.
Brooklyn.
Here we are with the Stone Salon. We're so grateful to all of our friends who come on and talk about stuff.
Now
Make music, talk about stuff.
we're
We've got a really great topic. I think.
we're meeting in an undisclosed remote location. So we're outside. All I can say is we're outside and we have candlelight, and as the sun makes its way home in the west, it will get dark, but the candles will, give us a little light to finish up the big show. And we have here our guests tonight are the always interesting Susan Talvey, and Zach, my collaborator. Zach Fredman, he's in Brooklyn, a major collaborator, oud player. Hey Zach, what was the name of that tune that
I still couldn't find it. I was rushing to eat dinner before, but there's a line like
so pretty.
Yom HaShivi'i Shavuot. I can't remember. It's upstairs. I could run and go get it. Maybe I'll do that.
Just tomorrow or something, whenever you go by it.
I'll send it to you.
I forgot the name of it, but it's so pretty. I was playing it today. It was so lovely. And we have Karen Flaty. She's sitting in a garden. Look at her. She's in space. She's in space in a garden, surrounded by a garden in space. So Susie's looking at her phone. And the dogs are, she's solving a problem. The dogs are making noises. If they make too much noises, I'll have to throw them a bone and try to make them quiet. Because you can probably hear them, right? They make the most unusual sounds. And so tonight we've been doing the salon. Well, let me just briefly make the introduction. I started doing this, we brought it to the High Low, a interesting venue in this city where we are, the undisclosed city, here on the omphalos, the heartline, the belly button of America. In the High Low, it's called, and we pulled it into this wonderful space there that was dedicated to literary arts. And what we had music and some poets and storytellers and things like this. And we even usually had an academic offering to each version that we did there. So we were just getting started there. We were doing it once a week on Thursday. Once a week or once a month?
Once a month.
Oh, we started once a month on Thursday nights, on a Thursday night. And then, of course, the pandemic, the virus hit, and so we came home, and then, after some days, weeks of trauma, of isolating in place, we said, why don't we take the salon online like all the other things we're doing, and let's do it weekly. What the heck? All we have to do is, in our undisclosed location, we just have to go somewhere and do it, somewhere where we're living. And so we started doing that. And the salon comes from someone who was influential in my life. His name was Professor Dov Noy at Hebrew University, and he hosted a salon at his apartment on Balfour Street in Jerusalem for many, many years. And if you got an invitation to Dov Noy's salon, you were one of the more interesting people in the country at the time. And I got an invitation because I would do music. Nobody else was doing music, and he wanted music. He loved music. So people would just go around and talk about what they're into, and he would comment on what they were saying because he knew so much about so many things. He was a really wide-ranging intellect. He was. May he rest in peace. And he had taken this salon concept from a Quaker concept that his teacher at Indiana University, whose name was Stith Thompson, Stith Thompson, who was really important in the field of folklore. He taught at Indiana University for many, many years. And Dov Noy was his student, and Stith Thompson held this.
He wrote books, Jimmy?
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, and he developed a classification system for stories and songs and things like that. And people still use his classification system. So Dov Noy brought the notion back to Israel and set up a place, repository of folklore stories in Israel, and also of songs, music, and based on Stith Thompson's work. And he also brought this custom of the salon. And of course, we also have hair tips. So the beginning, the hair tips, Susie's got a large ratio of hair to face. So she probably has a few hair tips to start off with.
That's because one of our friends thought the salon was about hair tips. So it continues to be part of the joke every week. But so far, we have not done any hair tips.
Actually, we have no hair tips. We've never had a hair tip yet. Though you owe me, you know. So, but we don't have any hair tips other than keep it short and shave it, and that's it. Make it simple. We also have tonight, we've invited Karen Flaty. Karen Flaty is, she oversees the garden.
She is the mother of the CRC farm, but that's just the beginning.
That's a picture of it behind her.
What she does. Just the beginning of what she does, and her influence, and all of the wonderful things that the farm touches, from food deserts to protest to just there's so many things that the farm feeds, body, mind, and soul. So it'll be great to hear. And she's also in a really interesting program with the Jewish Renewal group that I think would be also interesting to hear about tonight.
Now, I just wanted to, Zachy, do you mind if I start with talking to Karen Flaty?
No, I'm here. I'm hanging.
So there's Zachy. He's my pal. He's playing an oud. If you can see what he's doing there in the background, that's that's our obsession. He's playing our obsession, and we play beautiful music on it, and tastefully try to integrate music and poetry and story and improvisation. Though in the traditional style of playing, it's based on improvisation, really, and improvisation over these certain kinds of modes and scales that we play with. So we'll talk about that later, and we'll do some poems, and maybe we'll tell a story or two, and Zachy will play some tunes, and we'll just see what we get. So and we'll go until what, sunrise? Probably not. We'll probably go an hour, because Susie falls asleep at 9:30. At 9:30, she's gonna be like this.
Well, get up early.
Yeah. So anyway, so Karen Flaty, how'd you get into gardening?
So my grandmother grew probably the majority of her family's food on a very small city lot in St. Genevieve, Missouri, where my mother grew up. And I kind of grew up hanging out in her gardens. And this plot was her household was no larger than an average city lot, really, in South City. So not a huge amount of land, but she knew how to work it, and they had a practice. So I grew up around gardening, intensive gardening. My father was a great gardener. With the CRC Mitzvah Farm, actually, I got involved 3 years ago and jumped into it when folks were looking for volunteers. It was actually on the heels of losing both my sister and my best friend, our very close friend, 2 months apart. Sheila Michaels' yahrzeit is actually early next week. And I told Wendy I would get involved with it when I got back from a trip out east. And the rest is history, so they say. But
is St. Genevieve, doesn't it have a a fundamental history here? Like it's like really old settlement here. Am I correct in that?
Yes, it's the oldest settlement west of the Mississippi. It was originally settled by French. We were the top of the Louisiana Purchase, and St. Genevieve was a town of pretty big significance on the river. Actually, Rome was looking at it as the seat of the diocese when they were establishing the Catholic Church here. It was considered instead of St. Louis. So it was a town about bigger than St. Louis at some points.
Wow.
In its history. It's got the oldest extant collection of French colonial architecture in this hemisphere. There's
Wow.
a smaller amount in Quebec, but we've got the largest amount here. You might be interested in this. There are French fiddle traditions down near St. Genevieve and old mines that actually go back to the colonial period. French fiddler from that region went to Quebec and said that the tunes were identical bow stroke to bow stroke. So we do have this amazing musical tradition down in that region that's not heard of very much up here.
That's
I'm
cool.
amazed by that. Yeah, I'm amazed by that. I thought I just knew nothing about it other than it was an old settlement. Where the heck is it? I don't even know where it is.
It's about 60 miles straight down the river. It's also a river town.
I know
it's
where it
down
is.
55.
Yeah.
I mean, by
went
the
to
road.
jailhouse. Yeah. I do know where it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. So then what's the program that you're in now? Tell me, how does that connect to your gardening passion?
So I'm in the Earth-Based Judaism certificate program through Aleph, the Jewish Renewal Alliance. The first class was taught by Arthur Waskow on Tanakh and Earth-Based Judaism. How it connects to the gardening is, with the gardening, there's this, our people were farmers and shepherds. And so that is really the context out of which we grew, was this really intimate relationship with our ecosystem. And it's really hard to get English language around that whole notion of Adam and Adamah, how closely, we tend to think of ourselves as kind of very separate from nature and environment, but in fact, it's inseparable and it's our ecosystem. So with farming, there's this intensely intimate relationship that's different than walking through a woods or experiencing nature in that way, because you get to know all of the cycles of the earth and of the rain. And, there's this very, you begin to know the earth. Like, I feel like I know that farm like a family member. So Judaism grew out of this really intimate relationship with our ecosystem, and many of our practices emerge out of that relationship. They end up going through, many different cultures, many different places to become what we know today. But there's this kind of first birthing of our tradition out of this intimate relationship. And so the Earth-Based Judaism program is trying to get back to some of those understandings that are really foundational to who we are as a people.
That was one of Freud's critiques of his own tradition. One of his critiques was we have become separated from our natural or mythic natural origins. They took a lot of heat for that in later years. But yeah, I think that's really cool. I understand that. I mean, I would, to me, nature's dirty. I don't go there generally because it's dirty, and I don't go camping or anything like that. But I'm ready to get into gardening. And ever since you doing this thing, I've been watching and I think about it. And I think about it in just the way you described it. Like, I could get into that. My daughter's doing it now, and I see it and I get it.
Karen has been her mentor. She's learned a lot from Karen.
I've been her partner, Susan, I would say.
Well,
walking side by side, not really mentor, but yeah, there's something, you know, I just trained Holy Communion Episcopal Church, and one of the people on that team called me after they came down to the farm and we trained them how to grow for a pantry, which is what we do at CRC's farm. And one of the farm leaders had been working with camps, you know, has had a lot of nature experience, called me afterwards and said, Karen, I'm no longer afraid to try to grow anything. I'm no longer afraid of nature. So, but there's something really powerful and profound about the act of growing. And I think a piece of that, nature is like soil is dirty, it's dirty, is we've all gone through these land separations, right? These traumatic removals from the lands that are our homes and have become separated from this intimate connection with our homeland, but with all of the lands that we live in and how to co-produce food. And so, for instance, in my own family, my grandmother was able to produce like 90% of her food. I'm fighting every year to learn even 1/10 of the knowledge that my grandparents had and 1/10 of the productivity. I'm still nowhere. I know that looks like grand scale, what we do at CRC, but compared to kind of the productivity that they had, it's really kind of minimal. So.
You know, I was talking to Reverend Chuck Norris at St. James. They have a beautiful garden of raised beds in the Ville area, which is where we have our, you know, our commissary that CRC has been helping to stock. And he told me that, and he really believes it's because of the farming and because of the spiritual nature of having the farm at the church. He said they've had one member that's had COVID-19, and she was in a nursing home and got it there. He said his congregation is very healthy, and the farm is a piece of that. It's raised their consciousness about eating healthy and being positive, and also connecting the spirituality of the growing. And you've told me magical stories of what happens when people come and work the farm.
Yes, it's powerfully healing to work in a community around the act of gardening. It's empowering. I mean, really magical things happen. For me, it was a way to really move through traumatic grief and heal, you know, begin that healing process. But I've seen it over and over. I went to Green the Church Summit, which is a movement on environmental justice within Black churches. And the rallying cry I heard over and over is that the first act of revolution is to take control of our food supply. So taking control of our food supply gives us healthier bodies, healthier spirits, healthier minds. And it's a really important first step to liberation.
Wow.
So what are you growing this year?
So we grow so the whole principle of subsidiarity and mutuality is really important to me. So we ask, and I think it's important to this kind of work, we ask Trinity Food Pantry guests what they want to eat, and we grow what they want. So we grow 97, 98% of their guests are African American. So we specialize actually in foods that are traditional and to their foodways. So we are growing primarily collard greens because that is the most beloved food that folks there want. We have sweet potatoes in. We've already gone through mustards and turnips, which are two forms of greens primarily. We're having cucumbers and green beans. So, and we will replant the collards in August. So we produce for about 6 months of the year. And we produce between 1,500 and 2,000 pounds of food.
That's a lot of food. But no okra this year. I remember the okra last year was
Oh yeah, the
10
okra.
feet tall,
Yeah,
and each one was like a foot long.
I never
Am
saw okra
exaggerating?
like that.
That okra was huge.
We decided that without access to the building, that because you have to, in the height of summer, you have to harvest okra like every other day. So we would come and harvest and take it and drop it in the fridge and take it once a week. We decided that would make it easier for us to do this without the building. So my refrigerator isn't big enough for 20 pounds of okra a week. But
that's
next year.
another challenge, right? How to farm safely with COVID-19. How do you get people there, even though it's outside? How have you managed to grow this unbelievable garden without being able to have so many people there?
So we went when CRC, I felt, was being very prophetic and leading the way in terms of quarantining early, right? And protecting people. We asked if we could plant with a small group early on so we wouldn't lose the possibility of growing, because collards have to be planted in the spring. So we had one small team go in, and then we've had what we call stealth farmers go in, basically 2 by 2. And there's been like 3 groups of us who've been maintaining it. The Sunday after Shavuot is the first Sundays in the garden. We returned to group gardening. The medical team that's been advising us on protocols reviewed all of our protocols. And I actually just talked to Alexis Elward tonight about, some of the special circumstances, because one of our gardeners is very involved in the protests. In this current uprising for racial justice. She found us initially during the Stockley protests when folks were given sanctuary in our building. So we have all the kinds of, everybody wears masks. We're in a smaller team. We're gardening 2 nights instead of 1 night, so we can break up the tasks and have teams of 6 versus 10 or 12. People are very careful. Gardeners are very community minded. So we disinfect, we socially distance, and everybody wears masks. So that's how we've been doing it. And it's a commitment. Self-gardening. Yes.
I love it. That's great.
That is great. That is great.
So how do you, are those flowers that you have behind you, are they there to keep animals away? Does that happen?
They, so we don't have a lot of animals at CRC. When we opened the garden this spring, we found a dead raccoon under the compost bin. So there is some animals. We almost thought we should have a funeral for it, but we did not. Anyway, so the marigolds keep down pests, and also I think prevent rabbits from coming into the garden. We don't use them as much. That was a crazy year for marigolds in that picture. Now, they're also associated in other cultures. I want to say in India with weddings, right?
Yeah.
And in Mexico, they're one of the flowers for the Days of the Dead. So the orange marigold and the petals are very symbolic with remembrance. So,
and you can eat them, right?
Yes, you can eat them. That's one of the great things. I forget the film that's set in India where she's eating the marigolds.
Marigolds, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of edible flowers actually that we've lost knowledge of.
Well, I have I keep a garden, a urban kind of garden, up on a porch.
You do.
Yeah.
And do you?
Oh yeah, I take it seriously, and I, my way of doing things is I read about it. I go to the library and read about it. So I had read that they should plant marigolds around the things that I was planting, and that's why I see them in the background why I was asking. And the truth of it is that over the last couple of years, that little patio garden of ours has really been beautiful, and we've really grown some beautiful things there.
Our
What are you
grandson's
growing in it?
over last night, and he picked his own blueberries to put in his yogurt this morning. I have a blueberry bush. That's really well.
We've got a lot
The
of herbs.
blueberries
and
doing great, but most this year it's herbs and some tomatoes.
We got
Oh, how
distracted
fabulous.
this year
Yeah.
because some work up there, but it's been an important space for us. You know?
And Sarika's got this amazing garden, so she's given us greens every day and radishes. And we're waiting for the carrots and the cucumbers.
How wonderful. I love
This
that
is a big
you said
stretch for me.
Yeah, no, it's huge to begin gardening when you're not. And so I tell people all the time, your garden is going to lead you. Just pay attention and it's going to tell you your next step, and to grow it organically that way. You know, year by year, you do different, you do more.
I get
It's all
that.
about observing
I totally get that.
and paying attention. What you said about it being an important space, that's one of the things that is really emerging for me. There's this notion in geography called spaces of resistance. And that anything that disrupts a system and pushes back late stage degenerative capitalism, which commodifies everything, right, in our lives and is oppressive. So anything that pushes that back and creates this space of resistance against it allows something else to flourish, like the garden on, and allows other things to flourish. So, and I believe that gardens build community that then become these spaces of resistance that begin to create all kinds of different change through their very being.
Nice.
Well, I think that because people have had time, more people made gardens this year, and more urban gardens, and more people reclaiming their spaces. And of course, Gateway Greening, we have to give a shout out. We're so blessed, I think, in this community to have Gateway Greening.
Yes.
That's so generous and really wants to see people garden.
Yes.
And take back that land and, you know, kind of grow that kind of resistance. I love that.
Yeah.
And I have seen you do magic in the garden. People with mental health issues, people who have come right out of prison. It's like, I don't know, it's magic. It just brings the best. It brings the best.
I think it's the plant actually and nature itself. You know, I found one of my practices after I lost my sister and Sheila was to actually do Kaddish in Forest Park with a minion of trees, I called it. But because it was being inside was really, really difficult. And I sat Shiva down by the lake where we do Tashlik. But nature has, and I came to really understand during that time, actually, that I think as trees process our CO2, they also process our trauma and our stress, and they actually remove it like they're removing CO2 from the air. I was training, actually, or not training, but Ward Chapel AME Church came down to CRC to learn about growing. They're starting a farm.
Oh, that's great.
On there. Yes, and we were talking about how healing it is for us as human beings and how essential right now having gardens and garden space. But things shift dramatically. You see people calm down. We see kids with learning challenges focus in different ways when we're in the garden. You see people leave lighter, able to cope. I know a lot of the work that Sarika is doing is about healing trauma and the act of gardening.
Yes.
Is where she's focusing the energy of her work. And it's a very important modality.
Can I tell you a story?
Sure. Some of your stories, Jim.
This happened at, I used to go visit prisons. And this is a story about the garden in one of the prisons I visited. And I think you'll appreciate this story. There's one prison that I visit that has a garden adjacent to the chapel where I meet my students. There is a fence that is locked within the compound that leads to the chapel, an extra fence around the chapel, that is, that requires a large skeleton key to open when I visit this chapel. The first time I opened the chapel, it's myself, they gave me the full key ring at the front gates. I had to fumble my way through to get into the fence around the chapel, then into the chapel itself, then to open up the room within the chapel where we meet. I didn't leave the gate at the fence outside the chapel open, so no one knew I was there. I later discovered that the prisoners watch to see if the gate at the fence is open. If it is, they come. Often my visits were not publicized correctly, so if the gated fence isn't open, I could sit there alone, but if the gated fence is open, everyone wanders in, and whether my students arrive or not, there's plenty for me to do. I had to figure this out for myself. The gardens around the chapel are off limits to all but the Native American prisoners. There are hand-drawn signs on the sidewalk indicating that. I don't know what the background of that rule is. I suppose this is holy ground for those who tend that garden. The garden isn't large, maybe 10 feet by 30 feet long, about the size of the ground floor of my house. I am not a gardener, but these gardens I have noticed from the first time I visited the prison. There is a careful wildness to these gardens and a combination of sizes, colors, and textures of plants that I've never seen before. They are well tended, but they could convince that they are not well tended. It's that quality of wildness that I have seen in some gardens that this garden shares. Every time I open the fence, there are a few, 3 at the most, men who immediately enter and work in the gardens. Mostly I think they are picking weeds and cleaning out brush and such. They come in right away. I've wanted to talk to them, but in my first few visits, I was put off, I admit, by the caution written on the sidewalk, and well, they are some heavy-looking dudes. One day when I was there alone, they came as usual right away into the gardens and got to work. I stood on the sidewalk and mentioned something about noticing their garden. They grunted and nodded, but didn't respond much. I pushed on. I started talking about how the garden looks to me, the textures, the shapes, the colors, and how it turns every time I visit, but always retaining both the wildness of the plant world and some sort of organizing hand. That characterization, the combination of wildness and an organizing hand or principle or spirit, seemed to open them up. One of the fellows began to describe the plants he added this year, using language that was above my plant knowledge. He mentioned a certain kind of phlox that was adding something this year. I had broken the barrier. The next time I saw them, I made a few more comments. This time they didn't open to me as before. They said this: limited resources, hard, not much to work with. I wanted a picture of this garden, but of course I can't take in a camera or a phone even. It's that feeling in nature of the unnatural, or in the unnatural of nature, to be reminded in this 300 square feet that there is a wildness and an order in this space, both, and that it is holy to someone living within these fences, gates, and walls. Sometimes it can be spoken, sometimes not.
Amen.
Sweet.
That story makes sense to you?
Absolutely.
Hmm.
On many, many, many levels.
Hmm.
I suppose I wasn't sure what I was seeing there, but I was seeing something.
You saw it all, Jim. Actually, that is a really incredibly powerful description and
Yeah, I could see
observation.
when I told those guys that it opened a door with them. It was really interesting.
Mhm.
it was a so anyway, so I think about that when I do my little thing. I think about that story.
I love that notion that you pulled out of the wildness and the hand of order. You know, Rabbi Waskow wrote in Seasons of Our Joy about how Shavuot, the offering of the bread loaves, is about that combination of human creativity on nature's abundance, so that there's this both and. It's this very co-creative and synergistic
Yeah.
intimacy.
Yeah. I get it. And you know, when we visited some places, we went to Versailles once, and we looked at the gardens there. And we were in England, we looked at the gardens there. We went to Monet. Was it Monet or Monet? Monet. Looked at the gardens there. Giverny. And that's what I saw in Monet's gardens.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that.
Yeah.
And it was so moving to me. And gardens that we know in Israel, Susie's sweet, I guess, kind of kibbutz mother that Susie knows from a long, long time ago. She kept a small garden outside her tiny little place on this magical kibbutz that was such a beautiful garden in that sense. It was so deliberate and wild.
Mm-hmm.
And she was deliberate and wild. And she also used the garden like like a Baal Shem. You know, there's a theory that the Baal Shem title was a title of a herbalist. So that the Baal Shem Tov, there were more than just the Baal Shem Tov, there were other Baal Shems. The Baal Shem, so that the title Baal Shem Tov, there's a theory that it was a title that a person earned by being able to use herbs in healing ways, herbs and such. And she was like that.
Yeah. Everything became tea. Everything became a salve. Everything in her garden.
Ahuva is her name.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what, that's how, and it was just outside her small little place on this kibbutz, right on the Mediterranean.
And I can't tell you how many times she would make me smuggle herbs home. I have lemon balm growing from, I mean, it's illegal. I could go to jail, but I have lemon balm from her, all kinds of nana, different kinds of mints, you know, that she would insist that I had to have. But, you know, there's also this, I did a teaching on Friday morning. I don't know if you saw this, but with my sister is an Ayurvedic practitioner, you know, Jill, you know, my sister Jill. And I did a teaching on Friday morning with her doctor. He was in India. So we did it in the morning and it was night there. And we talked, you know, about faith and healing and from each of our different perspectives. And one of the things that he taught from the Bhagavad Gita was that when the herbs stop having their healing power, that's when we know we've gone too far and it's over. And so he said, don't give up hope because the herbs are still healing. So we don't give up hope yet. So keep growing.
When I worked at Mary's Pence, there was this extraordinary, we funded this program in Rio. We funded very, very tiny women.
Say a word about what Mary's Pence was.
Mary's Pence was a radical feminist Catholic organization that raised money to give grants to women-led projects in the United States and Latin America. And one of the projects we funded was in Rio, and it was a group of women who literally were living on the top of the garbage dump. So like Fresh Kills, I tell people, right, on Staten Island. And a woman religious a Maryknoll missioner sister from the western coast of Africa came to work with these women, and she walks into their home and recognizes all of these plants that were indigenous to the west coast of Africa that had been carried to Rio on slave ships. But the knowledge had been lost, and the women had no idea that they were sitting on this treasure trove of healing medicinal herbs. But Sister Efwe knew, because the wisdom had never been lost in her homeland. And so they began creating medicines and healing tinctures for this community because Efwe still had the knowledge. And it just such an amazing story, right?
Beautiful, yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me that Baal Shem means herbalist and herbal healer.
Well, thanks, Karen Flotty, for being on the big show.
Really.
Thank you for asking me. This was a delight.
We love to do the big show. Susie and I do, and
But a big part of the big show is hearing from Zach. Hearing some
so
music.
Zach and I are going to do some music and poetry, and
Jimmy had a big release this week.
no, the release is next week. I
The
think.
release is next week, excuse me.
We leaked out a few things.
Oh. A new musical project. And Zachy, you're on.
I'm in one of the videos, and I got to
Yeah.
hear the project. It sounds so great.
Yeah, it's really great.
Yeah, I want to start
Dressed
making
for
more.
class.
I want to start making more music that has really more language components in it. You know, less songs, more language in other forms.
A friend of mine, Priya Darshini, released an album about a month ago, and I was listening to it. It was one of the first things she did with this little quartet, and they used a microphone. This guy invented this microphone. He calls it, I can't remember. It's like a head, binaural. They call it bi-aural, and it's got two, and it's shaped like a head, so it records special. And like the 7th or 8th track on the record, she starts speaking poetry. And it was the first time I heard poetry, spoken word, in something other than what we do that sounded so good. It after having heard a few tracks, the poetry stopped you in your tracks. It took you to a whole other place.
Yeah. Well, I hope, I was delighted by the final tracks where there was only a couple of songs on the piece and mostly poems and other kinds of things like that. And I liked the variety of things like that. And we didn't really intend it that way. It was just that what was happening and what was emerging out of me. So, hey, Karen Flotty, don't think you have to hang around because we're going to
Play some music.
We're going to play some music and stuff. And I don't want you to feel like, you got to be in the audience.
Great. Thank you so much. Love to
Nice to meet you,
And I'm
Karen.
going to go
Thanks for
listen on
coming.
Facebook. Okay. Bye.
Thanks.
Karen Flotty has a good name. It's the kind of name that I would never just call her Karen. It's Karen Flotty, It's such a mellifluous name. Karen Flotty. It's like Susie
You guys
Talvey.
hear me okay?
Oh, yeah, great.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So this, for those who are watching and all the ships at sea and distant ports, Zach is playing an oud. Which oud is that, Zach?
This is Faruk Tarun's from Turkey.
So there's a Turkish oud, there's a more of an Arabic oud that's a little bit smaller, right?
Sometimes bigger.
Yeah?
The Turkish
I
ones
have
tend to
a-
be.
Oh, right, the Turkish ones are smaller. So I have a one that's really small. It's made nicely, but it's small. Armenian. It's small. It's nice. Got great woods. It's rosewood. Oh my God. Who makes ouds out of rosewood? Guitar made out of guitar woods. I told you the story about beloved, may he rest in peace, Charles Chase, who collected these woods and stored them away and found an oud maker who could make ouds with guitar woods. He was a visionary, loved the oud. So Zachy, we playing, and It's gonna play. You want to play that melody that I was talking about?
Yeah, why don't I do a little Taksim in the Makam, and then I'll go into that tune, and then maybe you'll read some of the poetry from the project.
Yeah. A taksim is an improvisation based on a kind of basic kinds of forms, and you know, that's the nature of this music. It's based on traditional forms that are not that fixed. I mean, there's only a few fixed elements. It's mostly improvisation. And the oud is a unfretted instrument, so you can gather in sounds on the oud that are closer together. The intervals are closer together than adjacent keys on a piano, so you get that sound of microtones, we call it, and that's what gives it its distinctive sound. Go ahead, Zaki. Send somebody. Send him. Send him. Send her. Send me. From the narrows, I call God. God answers with expansiveness. What did 2 know that another 10 did not? Was it safe? I don't know. The other 10 were certain it was not. There are giants scared the hell out of us. One took a side trip, preyed on the graves of the ancestors. From that drew strength to be optimistic. Now we are optimists. What's an optimist, I asked. One who fails with enthusiasm. I told my children and instructed them to tell their children. Far into the future, until came a generation speaking only dark words. The generation of dark words. We started over. It was not unexpected, though we didn't prepare enough. I didn't intend to tell a sad story. When two more were sent out, they heard when the hearts of all the people have melted. The story concludes with a mystery blue to look and remember. The blue came up once every 7 years until recently. Nowadays, I carry it around in my backpack. A minority story saves us. A thread of blue, a reminder. There were 12. 10 of them were full of shit. One of them laid flat down on the graves of the ancestors. That's strong there. Brought another one in. From the future, we prefer the minority report because it's true. Sweet. That was a good one.
Yeah, that one's nice. The oud tuned up. I've been having so much fun the last couple of weeks with the oud tuned up, and so you play in D or G, and everything's just open. Sings really nice.
What'd you do? You tuned the two bass strings up?
This one is tuned up to a G, so that you got this octave.
Yeah.
And this is tuned to a D, so that you have this octave.
So instead of C and F, you got D and G?
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to do that. I gave it up because of you.
We're going back.
We're going back. All right. I'm going
If you
back.
want to sing in D or G, that's the tuning.
Yeah. Well, it made sense to me, you know. I don't know. Anyway, Zachy, thanks for showing up for the big show.
That was a pleasure.
And
that was great. The Alchemist.
Yeah.
So next week, we hope next Thursday night, 8:15, our expectation is to have Claire Saffitz and her sweetheart Harris, who just opened today in New York a new restaurant called Polky's.
Polky's.
It's Jewish barbecue.
No way.
Yeah, and the menu is a riot. It's great. It's got things like macaroni and cheese kugel and all kinds of really fun things. And
do you know Harris? Have you run into Harris?
We've met a couple of times.
Yeah. So it opened today. So and you know,
wow.
Claire has her amazing Bon Appetit podcast, and she's gonna, and so they're gonna join us. So we hope, Zachy, you'll be back.
Hope so.
Maybe Joe Firestone will come and be on with a little bit.
We're going to try not to be so serious. You know what I mean?
So he's not going to ask me to talk about stuff.
What is? No.
But yeah. But it's good just to connect and to have this opportunity to connect with our friends. And of course, a lot of Adina's friends too.
I wrote this prayer for students today. Prayer for students, or thank God for not thought. Thank you, students, for the simple lessons, the ones that require practice and more practice, especially the ones without thinking, like music, the works of the hands, repetition. Thank you for the gift of repetition and to be passing the skill, making practice glorious. Oh, practice, how I love the release from thought, each moment in teaching and learning, a respite from thinking about the crooks, phonies, and mountebanks in control of our country. How much better your little faces on my screen as I sit here and give over something I have, you do not. Without thinking, we are liberating each other to storm the gates of incompetence that are sturdy in our time. I mean, today, oh, holy God, hallelujah, amen.
Sweet.
That's great.
Nice. Yeah,
All right, everybody. Susie, thanks for showing up.
I'm always showing up. I don't know if my friend Amit came on tonight with us. He's at Children's and he's working to heal. He's doing everything they're telling him to do so he can be cured. So I don't know if you joined us tonight, Amit, but we're sending a lot of love to you, a lot of healing. And
Yeah, we don't really see who's on, though. I just glanced on my phone and I see that Juggernaut was watching. Juggernaut,
also sing.
he was
Wow.
my friend here. He played,
Yeah.
accompanied me for many years. It was so delicious. He was such a pleasure to make music and to be friends with. He was watching. So Juggernaut's a wonderful violin player. Got to see Zachy play some oud tonight. Juggernaut, I know you enjoyed that.
But Zachy's in Brooklyn, and we saw Todd was on from the Speed of Light from Brooklyn. And also I saw my sister Lisa.
And Chris Hansen was watching. I saw Chris Hansen
And
was
Alyssa always
brought
there.
us
And
into
maybe
the
even
high-low.
Carol Rose. Right?
Carol Rose, was she here?
Yeah.
And Kate,
Another
my
great
friend
poet.
Kate was here. It was great to have Kate here. And Sue was here. Sue, nice to have Sue Worthland here. And Todd was watching. Lisa was watching. Leo was watching. Alyssa was watching. Oh, I didn't see. Lee Moore was watching. Oh my God.
Wow.
My dear teacher's son, Bonya's son, so sweet.
Mm.
And let's see, Ann Hess was watching, our delightful Ann, we miss her.
Be more when you were a little kid. If God forbid something happened to your parents, you were gonna be your parents.
We were gonna raise you. Oh my God. That would have been something.
We were proud. Thank you, Zach.
So thanks for showing up, Zachy. I'll talk to you soon.
My pleasure.
Love to Zivar and Rumi, all your family there. And, the new moon is coming up again.
Tonight? What night?
Not tonight, but it's
Couple
soon.
nights away, I bet.
It's soon.
Thank you, guys.
So we're going to say goodnight from the undisclosed remote mobile location here on the heartline, the envelope, the belly button of America. Good night, brothers and sisters and all the ships at sea. Stay safe, everybody.